Report to the class. Awesome. Okay. Well, hello. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Liz. I use she, her pronouns. And today we're going to be talking about teen dating violence in rural communities. I just want to preface all of this with my personal background really quickly. So I've spent the majority of my life living, learning, working, and playing in rural communities. And although everything that I will be talking about today does come from research that's been done in rural communities throughout the country, I can also attest to its truth and representation of reality through my own experiences. I also want to express the caveat that no two communities are alike. Just as Seattle and Chicago are going to be different urban communities, a rural community in Washington is going to be different from one in Montana, which will be different from one in Texas. So each of the concepts discussed in this presentation are not intended to generalize rural life, but rather to underline some of the commonalities that many rural communities do share. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about what teen dating violence is, what a rural community is. We'll go over some statistics to help us get a better idea of what this issue looks like in context. We'll discuss what distinguishes a rural community from that of an urban or suburban community, and then we'll go over some risk and protective factors for teen dating violence in rural communities specifically, and we'll close out with a few resources. So, rural communities are not specifically defined in the census as anything particularly. They're just considered to be any place outside of an urban area. So an urban area is defined as a densely developed territory containing 2,500 people or more. To give you a better idea of what this looks like in the context of Washington and Snohomish County, here are some statistics. So in Washington, as of 2017, 19.3% of the population was reported to be living in a rural community. In relation to that, as of 2010, in Snohomish County during the census collection, 10.8% of the population was living in a rural community, which is approximately 776,000 people. So teen dating violence, we've talked about this a lot within our webinars, and there's all sorts of different contexts and issues that go along with this. But generally, teen dating violence is physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or financial abuse within a relationship amongst people aged 13 to 19. So this can include any number of abusive behaviors like gaslighting, financial exploitation, verbal berating, sabotage, and so many others. Nationally, for all youth in America, it has been found that 1 in 3 youth will be in an abusive relationship at some point in their adolescence. Out of this group, only 33% of them will talk to someone about the violence that they experience in the relationship. Teen dating violence is extremely common and it's underreported. It's often taken less seriously than domestic violence because of the social tendency to write off adolescent relationships as not being serious because it's puppy love. However, we know that no matter how new to dating or inexperienced a teen is, dating violence is always harmful and should always be taken seriously. To give us a better idea of what this looks like for rural youth, 20% of youth in the US live in rural communities. So 1 out of 5 American youth are living in a rural community that has been deemed as that by the census. However, 60% of rural adolescents reported experiencing either physical or psychological victimization within a dating relationship in the past 3 months. This means that rural youth are experiencing dating violence almost twice as frequently as suburban or urban teens. Although recent data on teen dating violence prevalence in rural community is limited, multiple studies have shown that it's pretty clear that rural youth experience dating violence at a higher rate than suburban or urban youth. So with all that being said, to give us an idea of what this looks like, I want us to utilize the chat a little bit to participate. I'm gonna ask you this question: what distinguishes a rural community from that of a urban or suburban community? Go ahead and chat, shoot off any answers that you think fit this question. What makes a rural community different from that of an urban or suburban community? People are more spread out or further from their neighbors. Yeah. Any other ideas? Higher levels of knowledge of the individuals in the community, definitely. Yeah, those are both great answers. So we're going to go over some generalizations, some broader ideas, and things that you might have heard about rural communities. So beyond what the census statistics are going to be deeming as rural, there's specific characteristics that are unique to rural communities. And each point that you're going to be seeing here and that I'm going to be going over is a phrase that you'll often hear when someone talks about a rural community, or if they've lived there, or if they've visited, just some things that they might say, and it represents specific attributes of the rural community. So this first one, everybody knows everybody. A key staple of rural life is the small, tight-knit community. And this isn't an exaggeration. I was brought up in the chat, and the reality is everybody does know everybody. Or at least if you don't know someone, then you know somebody who does know that person. And these relationships might not be very close, but there is that awareness for one another. Small populations increase an individual's visibility in the community and establishes an important part of what we're going to be talking a lot about today as rural culture. Rural culture essentially means that everybody works at the same jobs, they go to the same school, they hang out in the same places, and they know what's going on in each other's lives. A consequence of this combination of small population and high visibility means that there's limited options for friends and partners. So this next one, there's nothing to do. Now, if you've ever lived in a rural area, you know that this isn't actually true. There's always something to do. It just might look something more of like seeing how far you can sneak into a neighbor's pasture before the horses see you, in comparison to going to a after-school activity with your friends that you would do in an urban or suburban community. This means that structured activity and recreation is going to be limited in rural communities, particularly for youth. The only structured activities available might be through school extracurriculars or a local religious group. These options aren't always going to be appealing to young people, so they might find less supervised, structured, or safe ways to treat their boredom. Youth want to hang out with each other. It's one of the primary motivations that they have for their social development is to be around each other. And without the lack of structured spaces, they're going to make that happen either way. It just might not be in the safest method possible. And this last one, it's a quiet, peaceful town. Because of the high visibility and low populations, cohesion and harmony are highly valued in rural communities. This might mean putting up with the neighbor who likes to light fireworks every Saturday of the year, or smiling through a conversation with that one person from church that you really can't stand. An important part of this is that progression takes longer due to this need for homogeneity. Change happens slower in rural communities, and this isn't always because of a lack of acceptance, but is the case some of the time, but it's more because of a need to move forward together. Conversations about systemic issues take longer to start and even longer to stick. And this whole concept of otherness, so being outside of the status quo, what they view as the norm, is very, very visible in rural communities, and it might be viewed as disruptive to the harmony that the communities value. And each of these unique attributes offers both risk factors and protective factors for rural youth. So let's talk risk factors. It's a quiet, peaceful town. So as a risk factor, one of the consequences of this lack of acceptance for otherness is an increased push for traditional gender roles and heteronormativity. Not only are these things risk factors for teen dating violence for all youth, no matter where they live, in rural communities, adherence to gender roles and heteronormativity creates significant peer pressure to be in a relationship for youth. Rural culture is also at play here. When your aunt or your best friend's mom is also your school counselor, it can be really difficult to open up or disclose incidents in a relationship. And this isn't in any way related to the confidentiality or the professionalism of rural professionals, but rather the discomfort that can come with seeing that person around town or at family events after disclosing these intimate or personal details about your life. The need for cohesion and homogeneity. This creates isolation, as rural community members will seek harmony and will try to maintain it all at any cost. And survivors don't want to be treated like an exile if they speak up. Normally, when somebody's going through a relationship that's abusive and they're trying to get help for it, trying to get out of the relationship, there can be social consequences with their family and their friends, particularly if they side with the abuser. However, in rural communities, the whole community might back the abuser because everybody knows everybody, and it's a quiet, peaceful town. If the abuser is the likable person and they want to stay on the good side of that person, they might choose to be on the abuser's side and discount what the survivor is trying to say. There's also a frequency to turn a blind eye when someone witnesses or suspects abuse in rural communities. They face disrupting the harmony that's highly valued by speaking up. So everybody knows everybody. Not only is there that pressure for youth to be in a relationship that we just talked about with that heteronormativity and gender roles, but there's also pressure to stay in the relationship. Rural youth are less likely to leave a relationship if they don't think they have another prospect for a subsequent relationship. And because of the small population, there's limited options. If a rural youth is unhappy in their relationship, but the only other single person that they could date is their current partner's best friend, they're probably not going to break up with that person, because that means their only options are to risk a scandal or being a part of the gossip or creating drama, or to be single. And neither of those are really appealing options in rural communities. There's status that comes with relationships and also avoiding drama. If they go through too many people, if they have too many relationships, there's all sorts of titles and labels that can be put on them that might create social backlash. There's also dating taboo at play here. So parents and adults in rural communities tend to have less support for adolescent relationships. So they might not be safe people to discuss relationship challenges or abuse with. This correlates to this everybody knows everybody characteristic with this dating taboo, because high visibility in the community creates codes of silences to avoid everybody knowing your business or hurting reputations. If you're worried about your parents finding out if you're dating because they don't want you to be dating, you're going to go into less visible spaces and you're not going to be talking to as many people about what you're going through, which can put you at risk for abuse in a relationship. This rural culture, back at it here. Not only does everybody know you, but everybody also knows the abuser too, and there's a potential that they might want to protect that individual. Violence in any form, but particularly sexual and intimate partner violence, often goes underreported as a result in rural communities. And rural culture plays a huge part in this. What if the abuser's parent is the chief of police? And what if their parent's best friend is the school principal? How do you get help and how do you talk to professionals if you aren't sure who you can trust or who will support you going through that? There's nothing to do. So this lack of structured spaces increases the risk factors for unhealthy relationships. It's been proven that substance use, increased sexual behavior, and violence are risk factors for teen dating violence in general. And those things are much more common in rural communities as it is. Limited resources in rural communities comes from those financial constraints that innately come with being a nonprofit, combined with those smaller target populations. This makes it difficult to access the community. They're spread out, they're not sure who they can go to, and it can be difficult to talk to the youth when there isn't that many spaces for them to exist in. Nonprofits can't necessarily live in a community, in a rural community, because there's not enough space, there's not enough population, and there's not enough funding for them to solely live out there. So their access to youth is much more limited in both time and financial ways. People also live far apart from each other in general in rural communities. So that was brought up when we thought about what distinguishes rural communities. Transportation is going to be limited, and there's opportunities for a lack of supervision or visibility in the community, which can increase the risk of abuse. Transportation can be used as a method of power and control in rural relationships as well. Not only is there's a sort of status that comes with having transportation to school and showing up to school in your partner's car, but there's also this way that they can use that against you. When your options to get to school are to take an hour-long bus ride, try to work around your parents' schedule, if that's even an option, or to ride to school with your partner in their car, what do you think youth are going to choose? They're probably going to choose to ride with their partner. And that can be used as a way to control their partner when they go through something. If they get in a fight and they can say, well, I'm not picking you up from school tomorrow. What is that person supposed to do then? That means that they have to talk to their parents, who might not be safe people to talk to. And it means that they might not have access to get to school if they don't have access to the bus in a convenient way. So we've talked a lot about all the ways that rural communities make it difficult for youth to have relationships and put them at risk for abuse and unhealthy relationships. But rural communities also have strengths in very similar ways. These concepts of everybody knows everybody, the quiet, peaceful town, and that there's nothing to do actually can help protect youth and keep them safe when it comes to relationships. So everybody knows everybody. So we're going to look here at the Icelandic prevention model. So this is kind of a newer thing that's come out in public health recently that's been shown to help communities lower substance use, suicidality, and violence among youth in their community. So with this, Icelandic communities essentially came together and they established shared values, which increased normative pressure, which was things like establishing curfew hours for the whole community. They had joint family dinners throughout school families. There's parental supervision across families. And so there's shared values and these strong communication between all of the groups within the community to help support youth and create a standardized, safe way for the youth to explore adolescence. And these shared values were upheld during leisure time. They were upheld during school settings or in peer interactions and through individual families. And although this model is really effective, it can be difficult to achieve. So if we think about this as maybe like a sort of ultimate goal over here, as something that would help keep youth safe, at the other end of the spectrum, we have urban and suburban communities. There's a cultural disparity at play here. So in urban and suburban communities, families in the school might not interact with each other. Youth tend to have leisure time that's not associated with their school. And they might have school friends that they only hang out with at school, and then an entirely separate friend group unrelated to school or their neighborhood. This abundance of options and larger population and this low visibility within the community in urban and suburban areas limits the communication between families. Rural communities and families kind of sit in this middle ground between this prevention model and this urban suburban communities. So if we have in a rural community, we have 3 different families, and one set of parents has that dating taboo. They say no dating, it's not allowed, you're not doing that, not here. And then you have another family over here that's like, okay, you can date, but it has to have supervised dates. You have to bring a sibling with you. You have to bring friends. We have to be there. And then you have another family that they don't care. Their kids are free to date when they want, who they want. They don't talk about it that much. Not an issue in their family, not something that they discuss. And so there's these different values that's happening here. And so when a youth tries to have a relationship with someone of a different value family, where their parents might not believe the same things, there's a lack of shared values occurring here that might keep the strong communication that innately exists in rural communities from helping out their youth. However, this strong communication is really vital in creating networks for support for youth. Rural communities are so close to achieving this structure because of that communication. This role culture is at play here. It means that everybody's going to know everyone, which means that there's this really strong possibility a youth parent will find out about any risky behavior occurring. If the person you're dating and your parents, both set of parents, are discussing things with each other, if they're able to communicate, that means that they're going to have a strong network to help keep their youth safe in that relationship and to not have any disparities between what's going on. With these shared values, if that was to be established in rural communities, they can utilize their strong communication networks even more to help keep their youth healthy and safe. More on these protective factors. So it's a quiet, peaceful town. There's going to be a quick response to issues that jeopardize community harmony. When rural residents become aware of the issues that have an impact on the well-being of the community, and especially issues that relate to children, they're often quick to respond. The communication network in small communities, combined with the concern for the safety and well-being of local youth, can really propel the community into action. Because everybody knows everybody, there's more people that have stakes in the well-being of local youth. The social relationships with the parents are also at stake on top of just wanting to help out the young people. There's nothing to do. So with that, there's a lack of structured spaces. There's a lack of formal relationships with adults. And because of this lack of formalization of those trusted adults, rural youth are going to be engaging in help-seeking behavior in an informal way. It's been proven that rural youth will do that more frequently than seeking out formal help from like a doctor or a counselor, that they will talk to someone who has an informal role in their life, like a friend's parent or a family member. This is much more accessible in a rural community. When we think about a youth having a really good relationship with their English teacher, and in an urban or suburban community, that relationship stops and it starts with school. So when school's out for the summer, they don't have that person in their life anymore. But in rural communities, if that happens to be their aunt or something, keep going back to the aunt example, but if that relationship is still there, they'll be seeing that person throughout town in the summer. They'll be seeing them around, they'll be able to access that person and talk to them about anything that's going on in their life. We also have the internet. So pre-internet era, support groups and resources had to be found locally, which in rural communities means anonymity is very difficult to achieve, and that can be a barrier to seeking help. The internet has allowed for support to be received in spaces where the individual can alter their identity to have that anonymity, as well as gather or connect with people who live in different parts of the state, country, or world to talk about what they're going through. The internet has served as a huge protective factor for rural youth, because if the nearest place for them to go to therapy is an hour away, that's very inaccessible. If they can just use their phone or their computer to talk to people to get help or find other people that are going through something similar, they can help keep themselves safe a lot easier. So here's a few resources to go over. I'm going to drop these links in the chat after, but the first one we have up here is the Rural Resources Community Action. This is all Eastern Washington organizations that can help support people in rural Eastern Washington specifically. And then we have Rural Collaborations to End Teen Dating Violence Toolkit. So this is for organizations that are looking to help support rural areas when it comes to teen dating violence. It gives a great landscape of what youth are going through and how to support them in a variety of contexts, whether that's historically marginalized groups, LGBTQ people, or underserved communities. I also have the numbers up here for DVS, Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And that is everything that I have for today. Are there any questions? Thanks, Olivia. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to stick around for a little bit longer just to make sure there's no more questions anybody wants to ask. I hope you learned something today, and thank you.